we're going to transition now to our next speaker, Dr. Bill Hohenstein. And let me real quickly share my screen. It's glitching for a second. Bill is the director of USDA's Office of Energy and Environmental Policy. He's with the Office of the Chief Economist. He's going to be talking or leading a discussion on building new partnerships for climate smart agriculture, new approaches and opportunities. And we're very fortunate to have Bill discussing and leading the discussion at this point, because he's been really at the center of these discussions across agencies within USDA and across departments. So Bill, I'm going to release my screen and hand it over to you.
Well, thank you, Terry. It's really a pleasure to be here to talk with the AgMIP community. I feel like you are my people. So I've got a long history of working with AgMIP, and prior to that, I cut my teeth in doing some of the work on integrated modeling. But what I'm going to talk about today and our panel is really partnerships, and in particular, I'm going to focus on mitigation. I know the AgMIP community is doing a lot of work on the understanding the effects of climate change on agriculture and projecting out those effects and looking at adaptation responses. It's really important to understand the role that agriculture plays as a source of greenhouse gas emissions and our responsibilities to address those emissions and what we're doing about that and what some of the policy options are. So I'm going to hopefully get through this fairly quickly, because I know we have a USDA stacked panel. I think we have 5 speakers from USDA to get through in about an hour and a half. So we're going to charge through this. And I'm going to, hopefully you can see my screen. Are we up? Can folks see my screen?
Yes.
Okay, I'm going to assume that's a yes.
Right now it's not in presentation mode. If you could just.
Okay, thanks for that catch. Yep. Let me go ahead and start that. Better?
That looks great. Thanks.
Great. All right, so let's just start at the top, where agriculture is responsible for about 10.5% of U.S. greenhouse gas emissions. And I apologize for the international audience. This presentation is going to be focused pretty much on what we're doing within the U.S. I think there are lessons we can learn from the U.S. experience that certainly apply globally as well. The sources of emissions are predominantly split between crop and livestock, with over half of the emissions coming in the form of nitrous oxide, mainly from fertilizer, and then the remaining emissions really split between enteric fermentation from ruminants and manure management systems. What's interesting is our baseline projection. So if we look out to 2030, fairly static, some improvements in productivity, some improvements in efficiency, also coupled with improvements in overall production and decreases in overall production. So in our baseline, emissions from the ag sector are not expected to go down. And what we do anticipate, though, is that the percent of US emissions from the ag sector will go up, because we're continuing to see a reduction in emissions from transportation and energy generation. So a lot of work to do there. I will note that the US has a very ambitious commitment under the Paris Agreement to reduce emissions by 50 to 52% economy-wide, and that there's an expectation that agriculture is going to step up and play a role. So what does that mean? Let me just talk a little bit about forests as well. The other part of our work, forests within the US have and continue to be a very large sink, offsetting somewhere between 12 and 15% of US emissions. And again, that's split between forest ecosystem carbon, but then also increasingly wood products. And that source category is in the long run going to diminish. There's almost no way around that. We'll see an aging of the US forest, we'll see a slowing of growth. And so in the long run, these systems will tend toward equilibrium. And when carbon is in equilibrium, they're not sequestering a whole lot of carbon. That said, over this time period, again, we see roughly stable levels of total sequestration with shifting rates from forest ecosystem and wood products. So an increase in the wood products pool and the importance of the wood products pool and this slow decline in sequestration rates in forests. We've done a lot of work to assess mitigation potential within the ag sector, and a lot of this sort of bottom-up analysis can be used by modelers. And so we compile that work, and we've compiled it in a couple of different studies, and we're updating those studies as we speak. We call them MAC curves, or marginal abatement cost curves. We look at the mitigation technologies and practices across the sector, everything from lagoons and solid separators to address manure, to improvements in nutrient management, to changes in tillage and cover crops, and retiring organic soils to address the emissions that occur from those soils. To date, there are a couple of increasingly important mitigation technologies and practices that we have not incorporated in our MAC curves. Cover crops, which is really coming on strong within the US, real rapid changes in cover crop adoption. Rotational grazing, some of the rice technologies. I would also mention things like feed additives and feed amendments and some of the more advanced enhanced efficiency fertilizers that we're working on as we speak. But before I move past this slide, it is indicative of what we expect in terms of mitigation potential. So you can think about at a marginal abatement cost of about $30 a ton of CO2e, which is lower than the social cost of greenhouse gases. You can get pushing upwards of 80 to 100 million tons of abatement, or about 20% of U.S. current greenhouse gas emissions from the sector. When you do the math, that's somewhere between $3 and $4 billion of investment that it will take within the ag sector per year. So keep that in mind. While there are effective opportunities, there are cost-effective opportunities that are lower than the social cost of reducing these emissions. These aren't free. And the question is, if these costs, where will the funds come from, and what are the options to convince farmers to do these practices? And again, our current list of practices and technologies is broad, including a wide range of things in cropland and grazing land, animal systems, and then a lot of options to sequester carbon, generate energy on farm, and contribute to carbon reduced or carbon-free energy systems. On the policy side, and I'm going really fast through this, we have sort of three main categories of policy options in terms of trying to leverage that $3 to $4 billion of investment that we might need. The first is to work through our existing conservation programs. We have a whole network of programs that we administer under the Farm Bill, and you can see in announcements that USDA has made over the past year that that's already underway. We're looking at programs like the Conservation Reserve, EQIP, CSP, and we're prioritizing the technologies and practices that can reduce emissions or increase sequestration. Tremendous amount of interest in leveraging demand from the private sector. And when we talk to the economic modelers, they get real excited about offsets and market approaches. I think maybe because they're easy to model, but essentially, the goal here is to sort of equate the marginal abatement cost of mitigation and allow sectors that have higher costs to tap into these relatively financially attractive emission reduction opportunities within the ag sector. I want to get to sort of what some of the barriers are to that and what we've found so far. And then a new approach, a novel approach, and one that we are investing heavily in, this concept called Partnerships for Climate Smart Commodities. And here, what we're hoping to tap into is this demand and interest from consumers to purchase environmentally friendly and carbon friendly goods and services. And we believe that if we can leverage that, if we can tap into what the public interest in and addressing climate change is, and translate that into value added for the farmer, we can create the kinds of economic incentives that can change behavior. So I'm going to go through a little bit about what an offset is. An offset is basically, I think we already talked about a little bit. You know, you've got a company or an organization that's made a commitment to reduce emissions. They have high costs within the walls of their plant or their entity, and so they want to partner with, say, a farmer or a rancher to take an action, reduce emissions, and get an offset credit. There are lots of different types of markets out there. There are regulatory ones in the state of California. There are a whole series of voluntary offset markets and registries. And then there's a lot of things happening in this sort of Wild West over-the-counter space where folks are basically doing their own thing, independent of what else is going on out there. We track market activity within our office. And the story's not great. You know, there's a lot of hype about agriculture. There's a lot of talk about agriculture as an offset source. There's not a lot of investment. While the overall offset marketplace for voluntary carbon offsets is robust, with, you know, hundreds of millions of tons of credits being bought and sold, people are surprised to find out that roughly 2% of those reductions come from the ag sector. With all of the talk and all of the hype about carbon offsets in the ag sector, agriculture is a very small player in the voluntary offset world. And we've done an analysis to try to understand why. And it really comes down to three things. The scale of these projects in the ag sector are tiny, the transaction costs are high, and there are lots of different options and rules out there, which is confusing if you're a farmer and you want to participate. And so what do we mean by that? You know, here is an example of the average size of some of these projects. And so you can think of forest carbon projects being, you know, maybe 500,000 tons of carbon, or some industrial trace gas projects being over 1 billion tons of credits. The average agriculture credit or project that's registered on a voluntary registry is about 100 tons, which is very small. So when you think about 100 tons at a value of $15 to $20 a ton, these projects are not generating a whole lot of revenue for farmers. On the other hand, these projects are expensive to set up. You've got to actually implement the project, which is fair, but then you've got to hire a consultant to help with the validation. You've got to hire someone to independently verify the projects. There are costs with getting the project registered. And when we've looked at how these costs are applied to these very small projects, they really don't pencil out. And so you can explain a lot of why agriculture has had trouble just in terms of this phenomena with really small projects, really high transaction costs, and then a lot of confusion. There are, you know, 3 different registries that are really dominant in this space. They've done a tremendous amount of work to generate the rules. There are 35 separate agriculture protocols out there. 25 of them have never generated a carbon credit. So there's been a lot of work to focus on this and to go through exactly how you go about working with a farmer to set up a project and generate credits. But in the end, these things just aren't penciling out, and there's not a great amount of activity. So, and a lot of frustration. That said, you know, we're taking a different crack at it. And so when you think about how offsets are supposed to work, farmer implements practice, generates 2 things: generates a commodity and generates a greenhouse gas benefit. And in the offset place, there are really 2 separate markets for, you know, the commodity. You can put it into consumer products, you can put it into biofuels, you can export it. And then there's a separate market where you register a greenhouse gas benefit and sell it to someone who needs a reduction. When we're talking about climate smart commodities, we're talking about coupling that greenhouse gas benefit with the commodity and generating market value there. And so, you know, that greenhouse gas benefit would be sold with the commodity as a climate smart consumer product, as a lower carbon biofuel, or as a climate friendly export. So, you know, while what could be a climate smart commodity, it could be everything from fruits and vegetables to cotton to corn to forestry products. And I know Katina Hanson is going to come on after me and talk about how we're moving forward under this effort. But I just want to say, you know, it's not exactly like the organics program, but, you know, when you look at a climate smart commodity, you're not going to be able to tell the difference between it and a conventionally grown product. But it will have value that's inherent to it because of the way it's produced, because it's produced in a way that we can document has greenhouse gas benefits. And we're anticipating that we can generate market value through that. So this new partnership effort that we've launched, it's not small. We're going to be investing $1 billion in this program over the next 5 years. We're going to demonstrate that we can do this at scale. We're going to test the procedures for how you quantify, verify, and monitor these emission reductions. We're going to make sure these programs are effective and efficient. And we are going to spend a lot of attention on making sure that this program is implemented fairly, that small disadvantage beginning and farmers have access to the program as well as the early adopters. So a lot of excitement about this, a lot of things happening within the department. We've got you know, analysis underway that we think is going to be helpful to the folks within the AgMIP consortium in terms of your modeling. So stay tuned and, you know, certainly reach out to us if you're incorporating mitigation technologies and practices into your modeling. We're going to be continuing to focus on these MAC curves and improving our assessments of costs and benefits. And we're fully supporting what's happening across the department in terms of program implementation, and there's a lot happening in that space as well. So hopefully, Terry, I stayed within time. I know you've got a lot of other folks to hear from USDA, but really happy to join the conference.
Thank you so much, and thank you for laying out so clearly the breadth and complexity of the challenges that are out there, and also the context of understanding where ag is and where it isn't, and where we would like to get to as we go down the road together here. And yes, AgMIP is very much interested in both adaptation and mitigation issues and technologies, and looking very much at how we can fully incorporate that in our respective efforts. So looking now at our panel and following up on the great points that Bill has laid out here, we have Dr. Kevin Kephart, who's Deputy Director of the Bioenergy Climate Environment Group there at USDA's NIFA. And Kevin, I will release my screen and give it to you.
Great, thank you very much, Terry. I'll see if I can do my share screen. And please confirm that you see it. Is it available yet?
It's available, but it's not yet in presentation mode.
We'll fix that. Okay, that should work now.
Looks good.
Great, thank you. And I want to thank you for the opportunity. Thanks to Terry. And by the way, my institute, the Institute of Bioenergy, Climate and Environment, we're a sponsor of this particular conference. I've been only able to pop in and out on occasion over the last 2.5 days so far, but it's been great. And I want to thank all of our participants, all of you that have contributed to this. Especially want to thank the audience for attending, and hopefully this has been of value to you. So I'm looking forward to hear about the follow-up afterwards from Terry and his team. I'm going to be speaking to you today about specifically about opportunities that might connect to this work that's underway and help to further it. Within USDA NIFA, we've been busy the last several months aligning our competitive programs with the administrative priorities. And recently USDA published their strategic priorities, or their strategic plan, the first of which was listed was in regard to climate change And climate change issues such as what you see right here are listed within that plan. So our competitive programs are aligned with that. As an example, our largest competitive program, what we call our flagship competitive program within NIFA, is the Agriculture and Food Research Initiative, AFRI, as many of you know it. AFRI has 3 RFAs that are published each year, the largest of which is the AFRI Foundational and Applied Sciences Program. And so modifications, as we've gone through this very lengthy RFA, it's undoubtedly our largest RFA that we publish, such things as in the executive summary, addressing the administrative priorities of climate change, nutrition security, markets, etc., including indigenous and traditional ecological knowledge, which might have some relevance to some of the work that this particular group is doing. We're interested in climate science, climate change adaptation, agricultural adaptation to changing climate and climatological risks and mitigation. If you wish to see the RFA, it's available at this URL that's available here, and we can provide that if you don't catch it at this point in time. In this particular RFA, the Farm Bill has defined what the 6 area priorities are for AFRI. We can't subtract from this list. We can't add to the list. These are the congressionally authorized areas of interest or areas of priority for AFRI. They include many things, plant health, or crop production issues, livestock, animal health and production. We have food safety and nutrition. We have bioenergy, natural resources and environment, ag systems, a lot of ag engineering. We have precision agriculture, artificial intelligence, data science fits within that particular opportunity, and then agricultural economics and rural communities. And you can see the amount of funds that have been allocated to each one of these for FY22. Now, within each one of these, there are several programs. I've gone through the RFA, and I want to identify those that are specifically calling out climate change, climate smart agriculture and forestry, greenhouse gas mitigation measurement, etc. So hopefully within these opportunities, you'll be able to find something that fits you in the work that you're doing. So within that first one, I'll go through this list of 6 that I've already presented here, but within that first one, we have 6 separate areas that are receiving proposals, receiving applications for research or extension activities or educational activities. So we have foundational knowledge and ag production systems. I really don't need to read through all of these, but you can see the diversity of opportunity that we have within plant health and production alone. The next one is animal health and production. We have 4 opportunities there that are relevant to climate smart agriculture and forestry, whether it's animal reproduction. We have a couple that are really calling out methane related issues. Maybe it's for studying ruminant nutrition and trying to mitigate or trying to reduce the amount of methanogens or the amount of conversion to methane that goes on in digestion. Or it could be looking at enteric methane through animal breeding, genetics, and genomics as well. So a couple of different methane opportunities within the livestock section of that. There's one opportunity that calls out climate science or climate smart agriculture and forestry within food safety. That's on diet, nutrition, and prevention of chronic diseases. My particular area has 4, so bioenergy, natural resources, and environment, that has a total of $33 million for FY22. So such things as soil health, soil carbon sequestration, research and education. We have water quality and water quantity, sustainable bioeconomy through bio-based products. We're excited about that particular area. Then, of course, sustainable agroecosystem. So an ecosystem level study in regard to this type of work. Ag systems, we have 4 areas. just basic fundamental agricultural and bioscience engineering, as well as biorefining and biomanufacturing. Engineering for precision crop, a lot of precision ag work is supported through that. And then one is a collaboration with National Science Foundation. It started in FY20. Beginning in FY20, we stood up 2 NIFA-supported artificial intelligence institutes and did that in collaboration with the National Science Foundation. Those first 2 that were funded were at the University of Illinois, or actually led, these are multi-institutional projects, but led by University of Illinois and another one at UC Davis. Those were funded for a 5-year commitment of totaling $20 million each. So quite a substantial commitment there. Last year, we funded 2 additional, or committed to 2 additional ones. One is led by Iowa State University and the other at Washington State University. Each one of those 4 that have been put into place now are conducting climate science, climate-related modeling. And they're so new yet that we'll have to see what they produce, but we're very excited about that. And in FY22, we'll be funding at least an additional 1. Well, those applications are coming in right now. Finally, our 6th area is agriculture, economics, and rural communities, and there's 3 programs there that again are emphasizing, are encouraging climate smart agriculture and forestry, as well as such things as mitigation, value propositions for farmers, ecosystem service valuation, those types of things in these 3 areas. And the total amount of money in that particular program, agricultural economics and rural communities, is $34 million. We have several cross-cutting areas within these AFRI programs. These are where several different divisions in NIFA contribute to a single request for application. Some of you might be familiar with these. We have one on agricultural microbiomes. We have another one, interdisciplinary engagement in animal systems. That's been doing some methane work as well. I'll kind of jump through these. I want to call your attention to one of these, data science for food and agricultural systems, or DSFAS, we call that. That has opportunities. But one that I really want to call out is A1721, about 3/4 of the way down the slide. So last year, we started this particular area by and awarded climate extension, education, and USDA climate hub partnerships. We made 6 awards last year, each at $1.5 million for a total of $9 million for that particular program last year. We feel like we really teed up some really great projects, really great collaborations with the climate hubs. And we included it in this year's RFA as well. So we'll see what kind of proposals come our way for us to make some awards there. But there's a second area within A1721 that I really want to call out, and that is a climate smart extension cap. So that will be a single $10 million award to some extension service out there. It's a competitive program, but it's the job of this coordinating agricultural program to coordinate extension efforts in climate smart agriculture. So they're going to really be a key hub within the land grant system to try to coordinate, not try, they will coordinate extension activities for many of the subject areas, including some of the work that you're all doing. They'll need to have a good grasp of what the modeling efforts are that are out there, and try to work to translate that to producers. So I'm really excited to see what comes forward on that. Okay, another part of AFRI is a second RFA, and that's called Sustainable Agriculture Systems, SAS, we call that. SAS has budgeted $70 million for this coming year. This particular program funds very large projects that are funded at $10 million each. So we're anticipating funding 7 projects out of this. And the letters, this requires a letter of intent to be submitted. That due date has already passed back in April. We've been reviewing those LOIs and getting back to the authors. The next step is for them to submit a full application, but an LOI submitted on the due date is a requirement. Now, $70 million, and we have three program area of emphases within SAS. The first one is climate smart agriculture and forestry, emphasizing these types of areas like greenhouse gas mitigation, markets, and socioeconomics, and then regionally appropriate climate adaptation and resilience efforts. These are, by the way, are all systems level projects. They're not single, really small defined research projects. And all of the SAS projects have to be integrated, meaning that there has to be meaningful effort in research, extension activities, and education. And the educational aspect is usually somewhat of some difficulty in projects because what it doesn't entail is hiring students in research projects. That's still research. So we have to see what kind of, for example, what kind of course development has occurred, what kind of special student activities there are along the lines of obtaining their degrees. Those types of things are what we're looking for there. So the second area within SAS is strengthening the bioeconomy, such things as sustainable bioenergy and bio-based products, resilience and robustness of food and agricultural systems, and potential for sustainability impacts, such as artificial intelligence, modeling, those types of things. But again, this has to be a system-wide and integrated level approach. Circular economy is of great interest to us. And so defining the circularity of a system would be a strong thing to present there. And then thirdly, the third area of the three is food and nutrition security. So local and regional food systems, nutrition sensitive, climate smart agriculture, again, this interaction between food and climate, and then nutrition security and diet related health disparities. And then there's the third RFA for AFRI, and that is targeted at supporting efforts on education and workforce development. $68 million have been allocated to that in three areas of activity. So postdocs and pre-doctoral fellowships and postdocs are one. But one that we're excited about for this year is, we call it YAY, and that is Youth Innovators Empowering Agriculture Across America. So positive youth development as part of our climate effort that we have out of NIFA. Then there's a whole list of other programs. I won't really elaborate on these, but these are also relevant of interest that also have either climate emphases in them, or that's just the nature of the program itself is about climate. So the SARE program is really a grassroots producer involvement. Actually, producers in their regions conduct the solicitations and make the selections for projects. There's the BFRDP, which is a on the ground training program, has high impact. There's the Sun Grant program, crop protection and pest management, and then a brand new one that should be published sometime in June. It's going through the policy review program right now, called Bioproduct Pilot Program. That's part of the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act that we learned about it last January and been developing the opportunity. That has funding at the level of $5 million for each of FY22 and 23, and that will be for pilot scale or scaling up of production technologies for either consumer products or for construction products. And then, of course, our capacity funds that we work with the land grant community is relevant as well. A couple things I want to touch upon that's important to NIFA. In addition to these funding opportunities, we're working through how we will be responding and how we will be trying to emphasize more environmental justice as part of climate. Executive Order 14008 called out a new initiative, the Justice 40 initiative. It has a goal of 40% of benefits from covered programs should be directed to disadvantaged communities. We've identified Well, yeah, it has to be in these covered areas like climate change, clean energy, etc. And here is how underserved communities are defined within that particular initiative. NIFA has identified 14 covered programs that are relevant to Justice 40. And so we're matching that up with what the statutory language is, what we can do to encourage the recipients of these funds to align with environmental justice types of objectives. So a number of these are well, they're all directed at NIFA's minority serving institution partners, including the tribal colleges and universities, the 1890 land grant community, Hispanic serving institutions, and Alaska Native serving and Native Hawaiian serving institutions. Actions that we have underway are, like I've said, assessment of statutory language. We're going to be adding language to RFAs at the very least to make sure that readers and respondents to the RFAs know that these are Justice 40 covered programs. We're already
Yeah, Kevin, you froze there.
Discussions, outreach in regard to have for you today, and looking forward to listening into the rest of the conversation.
Thank you, Kevin. It's exciting to see how NIFA has gone through its portfolio of tools and award mechanisms and woven climate and climate smart agricultural issues and themes throughout many, including the environmental justice activities and focus. A lot to really look forward to there.
Thank you, Terry.
Our next speaker is Katina Hanson, who's the Acting Senior Advisor for Climate Smart Commodities, with USDA's Farm Production and Conservation Mission Area. And she's going to talk specifically about the USDA partnerships for climate smart commodities. And Katina, I am releasing my screen.
Thank you. Hi, everyone. I'm going to take a second here to share my screen. All right, can you see it okay?
Yes, and you're in presentation mode.
Okay, perfect. I'm Katina Hanson. You heard earlier in the conference, I believe, from Undersecretary Bonnie. I am on detail in his office to launch this Partnerships for Climate Smart Commodities funding opportunity, which is really exciting opportunity from across the department. I'm in the Farm Production and Conservation Mission Area of USDA, and I'm actually on detail from NIFA with Kevin and other colleagues there at the National Institute of Food and Agriculture, but I've spent most of my career in the Farm Production and Conservation Mission Area, which includes our Farm Service Agency, the Risk Management Agency, and the Natural Resources Conservation Service. Okay, so I'm going to talk to you about partnerships for climate smart commodities. This is building markets and investing in America's climate smart farmers, ranchers, and forest owners to strengthen U.S. rural and agricultural communities. So markets are demonstrating demand for commodities produced using climate smart practices. Consumers are increasingly interested in how their products are produced. And this opportunity is about leveraging that demand to create new revenue streams for producers. This funding opportunity was designed with a lot of public input. There was a request for information back in September of 2021 and a few requests for information previously that also helped inform this. We received nearly 400 comments, and it helped to inform our design and structure of the funding opportunity. Some of the key principles are that it's focused on creating new opportunities and markets for agriculture and forestry. It's also focused on partnerships and voluntary and incentive-based opportunities for farmers, ranchers, and landowner-led projects. and it's accessible to small and/or underserved producers, as well as acceptable to early adopters, those producers that have already put things like cover crops on the land that are more beneficial to our climate. This is a big opportunity. It is approximately $1 billion, and it's made available for projects that will build markets and invest in America's climate smart farmers, ranchers, and forest owners to strengthen U.S. rural and agricultural communities. But it's also building the science and the monitoring and the reporting. And so you'll see that further on in this discussion, that this investment has a lot of potential impacts to how we measure the climate, how we work to build those markets that support the practices that are going to help to reduce those greenhouse gases. So through the Partnerships for Climate Smart Commodities, we'll support the production and marketing of climate smart commodities, which Bill has spoken about earlier, through a set of pilot projects that provide those voluntary incentives through partners to producers and landowners. And it implements climate smart production practices, activities, and systems on working lands. It also measures, quantifies, monitors, and verifies the carbon and greenhouse gas benefits associated with those practices, and will help to develop markets and promote the resulting climate smart commodities. Proposals have to have a plan to pilot implementation of the climate smart agriculture and forestry practices on a large scale, including meaningful involvement of small or historically underserved producers, as well as a quantification, monitoring, reporting, and verification plan, and a plan to develop markets and promote climate smart commodities generated as a result of project activities. All projects must be tied to the development of markets and the promotion of those climate smart commodities. For the purposes of this funding opportunity, as Bill described earlier, a climate smart commodity is defined as an agricultural commodity that is produced using agricultural, farming, ranching, or forestry practices that reduce greenhouse gas emissions or sequester carbon. And it's defined for the purposes of this funding opportunity, but we also hope to learn about what is a climate smart commodity through these projects. Markets for climate smart commodities may include companies or processors sourcing climate smart commodities to meet internal targets or other supply chain goals, biofuel or renewable energy markets, companies seeking to sell branded consumer products, or other opportunities that could provide a premium or additional revenue for participating producers and landowners. Within these projects, there has to be sufficient incentives to encourage producer participation, as well as generation of verifiable greenhouse gas reductions and carbon sequestration. And those are critical to project success and will be considered as we evaluate these projects. Highly competitive projects will include agricultural and forestry practices, or a combination of practices, and or practice enhancements. So things that can make those practices that are already on the ground better from a greenhouse gas benefits or carbon sequestration perspective. And all of the practices that are being applied have to demonstrate greenhouse gas benefits. We are saying that they can use our USDA practices, but they can also come up with new and innovative practices to apply on the land. There might be some additional compliance and reporting activities if other practices besides those we've already developed as standards at USDA are applied. And projects may include digesters only in our second funding pool under limited circumstances. Here are some of the practices that potentially are going to be under these projects. And who's eligible? So these grants will provide support to entities that are working with multiple producers and landowners who are applying climate smart practices on farms, ranches, and forest lands. And the scope of eligible partners is extremely wide, including public or private entities, such as farm groups, states, nonprofits, businesses, tribal governments, and higher education institutions. There is not a specific match requirement for this funding opportunity. However, it's part of the evaluation criteria and may be considered in the analysis. USDA plans to award grant agreements under this funding opportunity and will provide the general oversight of those grants and the reporting. However, the technical assistance to farmers and ranchers and foresters will come from the participant, the recipient of that grant, except for highly erodible land and wetland compliance determinations that are required by law. So these projects can be between 1 and 5 years in duration, with up to 2 years of no cost extensions considered on a case-by-case basis. And we anticipate projects to begin in summer of 2022. So those proposals have to include an executive summary, a plan to pilot climate smart ag and forestry practices, a measurement, monitoring, reporting, and verification plan, and a plan to develop and expand markets for climate smart commodities. And the proposals in the second funding pool are limited to particularly innovative pilot projects with a focus on enrollment of small and/or underserved producers and/or monitoring, reporting, and verification activities at minority serving institutions. All right, I'm not going to go into all the details here, but we have an executive summary with some basic requirements that's under the proposal. We also have this plan to pilot climate smart ag and forestry practices, as well as here's a little information about digesters, which have a potential to have a big impact on greenhouse gases. However, there's some additional resources for funding those projects outside of partnerships for climate smart commodities. And so in the first funding pool, they can include digesters as part of their proposal, but that is, it is not going to be funded by the federal funding. It just can be part of that broader project. Under the second funding pool, digesters may be funded as a part of a project to help fund proving out technologies and building infrastructure on the farm. And large digesters with high capital costs should plan to leverage other innovative financing as part of their applications. Small scale digesters that can build off manure management strategies and community digesters where one system serves multiple farms may be included. Funding for the digesters when combined with other sources may not exceed the cost of the digesters. And there is some additional application materials that have to be filled out if digesters are included as part of the proposal. Now to what you are probably most interested in, which is the measurement, monitoring, reporting, and verification plan. So this must include the approach to greenhouse gas benefit quantification, including the methodology approach consistent with our section titled Quantification Requirements, which I'll go into a little bit more in a second. An approach to monitoring of practice implementation, including the anticipated number of farms and acres reached through project activities. An approach to reporting and tracking of greenhouse gas benefits, including the anticipated greenhouse gas benefits per farm, per project, per commodity produced, per dollar expended, and also the anticipated longevity of those greenhouse gas benefits. as well as an approach to verification of greenhouse gas benefits and agreement to participate in what we're calling the partnerships network, which will help us to learn from all of these demonstration projects that we're planning to fund. So there is also a required plan to develop and expand markets for climate smart commodities. And the quantification requirements to help ensure comparability of project results, funded projects should use Comet Planner where applicable to determine common estimates of the greenhouse gas impacts of activities. But projects are also encouraged to use USDA's entity scale methods when greenhouse gas benefits estimates are not available in Comet Planner. And applicants are also encouraged to use innovative quantification methodologies in addition to those mentioned. The outcomes of the alternative methods should be compared against those entity scale methods and/or Comet Planner as appropriate. Alternate methodologies should be documented transparently, be based in peer-reviewed literature whenever possible, be replicable by third parties, and be available for other projects to implement. USDA is not prescribing monitoring and verification methodologies and is seeking proposals that include innovative, rigorous, and cost-effective approaches. Innovation and approaches to monitoring and verification will help to facilitate the deployment of climate smart ag and forestry at scale and provide information critical to adapting quantification models in the future. Proposed monitoring and verification approaches should ensure the integrity of the greenhouse gas benefits and resulting climate smart commodities while also ensuring that transaction costs are not a barrier to participation. Additional requirements for quantification, monitoring, and verification may be provided at the time of award. So under this opportunity, partnerships are extremely important. Grants under this opportunity will be only with a single entity. However, we're encouraging multiple partners to coordinate, and we have seen folks from across the spectrum coming together. A range of public and private entities are eligible to apply, and funding will be provided through 2 funding pools. And USDA intends to fund a diverse set of projects and will not discriminate based on size of the project. Just a little more on our partnerships network. USDA is establishing this climate smart commodities partnerships network to provide lessons learned. And topics may include approaches to quantification, measurement, monitoring, and verification, options for supply chain traceability, and approaches to marketing. And those lessons learned will be documented and shared publicly. So I kind of did this a little backwards and didn't talk about the funding pools up front, but we had a news release that went out this afternoon, and I wanted to make sure I kind of ended with some new news that just went out. And so we did already extend the deadlines, and so we're not extending any deadlines here. The first funding pool closed on May 6th, and we're currently considering those proposals. The second deadline is June 10th, and that is coming up soon, and that is for projects from 250,000 to just under 5 million. And it's limited again to those particularly innovative pilot projects and place emphasis on enrollment of small and/or underserved producers and/or monitoring, reporting, and verification activities developed at minority serving institutions. So the new news is we did have that first round close, and we shared that we received over 450 proposals ranging from $5 million to $100 million each. And that those applications came from over 350 groups and covered every state in the nation, as well as tribal lands, the District of Columbia, and Puerto Rico. which really is demonstrating the tremendous geographic need for these types of projects. Over the last few weeks, we've conducted an initial review of the applications for completeness, and proposals received that request more than $18 billion and offer to match more than $8 billion in non-federal funds will now be ranked against the technical criteria in the funding opportunity. And we do still expect awards for the first round of funding are anticipated later this summer. A little bit about those proposals that we've received so far. Some of the common commodities covered in the proposals were beef, dairy, corn, soybeans, timber and forest, hemp and rice. But there's a variety of other crops and livestock that were also represented, including wheat, barley, rye, oats, grass forage crops and other grains, pork, poultry, bison, alpacas and other types of livestock, cotton, peanuts, almonds and other nuts, aquaculture, sugar beets, potatoes, dry beans, dry peas, blueberries, citrus, and many other fruits and vegetables and specialty crops. So this is really exciting. This is, you know, folks from across agriculture, conservation groups, environmental groups, all coming together to propose these projects. And I just wanted to kind of end on that note and share that news with you. So if you want to know more about Partnerships for Climate Smart Commodities, we do have a great website that has a lot of resources and information, including a link to the funding opportunity and some previous trainings that we've done on this subject. Thank you.
Well, Katina, thank you so much for the update. And needless to say, this program has captured a lot of interest out across the agricultural world, including the science and modeling communities. I'd like to thank you and Bill and the department at large for bringing this program forward. I think you've already had some real positive success. We've had some great conversations with a number of different groups about the MMRV portion of this, and it prompted the opportunity to have lots of good discussions about, well, how do you measure, how do you monitor, how do you set up a system to be able to do that? And it's been very educational for many, many people, and it's been exciting to see that go forward. Our next speaker is Dr. Dannele Peck, who's the director of the Northern Plains Climate Hub with USDA's Agricultural Research Service. And she's going to talk about the climate hubs and maybe also a bit about the LTARs. So Danielle, I'm going to release my screen.
Thank you so much, Terry, and I'll share my screen. Sometimes it freezes up a little bit when I share, so nobody panic if that happens. I'll be back with you shortly if it does. Maybe we'll get lucky today and it'll be smooth. Okay. Can you confirm visual for me, Terry?
Looks good, thanks.
Perfect. Great, everyone. It's wonderful to be here on this last day. It's been such an exciting set of presentations and discussions across the last 3 days. I really want to come back again to this theme of partnerships and how important they are in so many different ways, as we've seen, to getting climate smart ag and forestry happening out on the landscape on a big enough scale. And so I'm going to focus on the USDA climate hubs primarily. You've heard them mentioned a couple of times over the last few days. And you've also heard a little bit about the LTAR network, and our climate hubs and our LTAR network do collaborate with each other. I work in both worlds, and so I'll try to show you some examples of how we're working together on a few exciting things for this shared goal. So again, Cynthia, Alex, and others have been emphasizing the importance of keeping our models connected to the ground. And that includes connected to those ag and forestry producers who are managing that ground. So throughout the last 3 days, I've been asking myself, how does the work that my team does at USDA Ag Research Service through the climate hubs and with our collaborations with the LTAR network. How does that work complement yours? All of the great agro-ecosystem modeling that you're doing. And here's what came to me. The modeling that you all do is really helping our society understand and anticipate and quantify the potential effectiveness, the potential costs and benefits of a wide variety of climate smart practices, some that are already in use and some that are just emerging, and you're ahead of the curve there and helping us understand potential benefits. These insights are ultimately helping inform conversations about the design of practices, the refining of practices, programs, and even policies that agencies like USDA and NRCS are implementing with farmers out on the ground. We heard from organizations like the Food and Agri-Climate Alliance about practices, again, that you all are modeling and they're gaining interest in, and even Congress, helping to fund these efforts. These practices and programs and policies have really important implications for our farmers and ranchers back out on the ground. And many of those implications are positive and really embraced. And sometimes they're unintentionally negative or unexpected or rejected out in the field. And so given this important connection between the modeling work that you're doing, how it influences and informs practices, programs, and policies, it's so essential for those models to be as realistic as possible, to be well informed by realities back out on the ground. And those realities are not just agroecological, they are realities about producer attitudes and values and behaviors and choices and constraints. So the more we can capture that in our models, the more realistic that the outputs can be and the implications for practices and programs. All that said, I also know how hard it is to be really good at multiple things. You guys are amazing at modeling. I'm so impressed. I used to dabble in that world. I left it a long time ago, but I look back and I'm just so amazed at how far you guys have come. It's hard to be an expert both in modeling and stakeholder engagement, staying in touch with folks out on the ground. It takes a lot of time to build relationships with people out on the ground. And we're all busy, both as modelers and as farmers and ranchers. And so it's hard to bring those two worlds together. And we need help doing that. One modeler can't do both of those things really well. And likewise, one outreach person like myself, can't also be good at modeling. So we've got to help each other out through partnerships. And so that's what I want to emphasize today. Again, I'm going to focus on the USDA climate hubs as an kind of outreach-oriented translational organization, but also my friends in the long-term agroecological research network at ARS, and there, very much a lot of field-based research going on, as you heard from Steve Mirsky earlier. And so together, I think we can strengthen the connections between the ground, our modeling, and end up with more effective practices and programs because of it. Again, we're aiming for practices and programs that are, place-based, region-specific, culturally appropriate, equitable and just, feasible and acceptable in a whole bunch of different dimensions. To make that a reality, somebody has to be convening conversations between the folks out on the ground and our modeling community, engaging them, co-producing research and outreach products, and doing so with really diverse partners. And I think that's one aspect where the climate hubs can help add value to the modeling community and AgMIP's efforts. So again, I'm going to skim through these first couple of slides pretty quickly because Steve did a great job introducing you to the long-term agroecological research network, or what we call LTAR. Again, a coordinated network kind of striving to help achieve productivity, environmental and rural prosperity improvements. And I want to introduce you officially to the Climate Hub Network. In this map, the stars represent our 10 regional climate hubs across the country, many of which are co-located with these ARS LTAR teams or very nearby them. On the LTAR side, again, emphasizing long-term research coordinated across the country and focused on multiple dimensions: productivity, environment, and rural prosperity. What I want to emphasize here is that LTAR is a partnership not only between ARS laboratories and scientists and their university partners, but they are also really striving to engage stakeholders, farmers, ranchers, agribusinesses, a long list of partners in helping co-design research, helping determine what research questions they want to ask together and pursuing those questions together. They're coordinating that research across the 18 sites, and then they're comparing, right? They're identifying aspirational practices, and some of those are climate smart practices, and they're comparing those aspirational practices to business as usual. And they're doing so using a common set of indicators that are being tracked across all 18 sites through time. And so they're starting to build a really impressive database of lots and lots of different indicators that could be useful to the AgMIP network. These, again, the notion of these common indicators is really to try and capture different trade-offs that aspirational practices versus business as usual bring to the table. And some do really well in production efficiency and economic growth. And I should have put, greenhouse gas emissions on here. Others, do better maybe in ecological and human health or social cohesion dimensions. But it's really neat to see these get compared across such a big landscape and under a bunch of different ecological systems. An example. This is a project, it's called CARM, Collaborative Adaptive Rangeland Management. This is an LTAR project that my Climate Hub is really intimately involved in. Essentially, it's a group of 11 stakeholders: ranchers, bird conservation groups, state and federal land managers, and extension specialists, who come together to collaboratively research and try to determine how can we manage a beef herd to produce beef and more grassland birds. That happens to be the conservation challenge in this landscape. That stakeholder team has been coming together for almost 10 years now with our ARS and university scientists and collaboratively making management decisions and asking research questions, finding answers to those questions, and then innovating and coming up with the next round. CARM is such a cool example of the type of co-production that LTAR and the climate hubs are striving for. And CARM is fueled by LTAR data. Again, just streams and streams of data from the ground and remote sensing, and bringing them all together into decision support tools. So it's fueled by LTAR data and facilitated by the Climate Hub, the Northern Plains Climate Hub. So that takes me to actually what I should be spending most of my time on, because it's my full-time job, and that's the USDA Climate Hubs. We are, again, a network of 10 locations across the US. There's a director at each of those 10 locations, along with a national office. This is our mission, again, science-based, region-specific, information and technology to empower farmers and ranchers and foresters to make climate-informed decisions. We are housed within Ag Research Service and the Forest Service, but with a lot of support from many, many other USDA sister agencies, some of which are listed here on the right. We work in kind of 3 areas that you can see along the bottom there. So we're helping to synthesize and translate science. We're helping develop usable technologies and tools. And then we're doing a lot of outreach and convening. How does my hub work in particular up here in the Northern Plains? This is just a quick example. Half of my job is to maintain connections with folks who are out on the ground and out in the field with producers. So this is a lot of our extension partners. And I loved the shout out earlier today from Noah about the importance of our extension partners. And I can't agree with him more. They are out in the field having conversations every day with producers. And if they come upon a climate related question or concern or idea, and my extension partners, can't expect them to be climate experts, but hopefully they'll think to reach out to us. with that question or idea or need. We're a tiny little team. Each of these regional teams probably has 2.5 full-time staff and then some soft-funded postdocs occasionally. And so we can't answer all of these questions ourselves. Instead, the other half of my job is to keep and build and nurture relationships with the world of climate and research and science. And to, when I get a question from the field, to know who in my network could help address this question or pursue this idea. And so my partners will come back and let me know what they think, and I'll carry that back to our field partners. Or my favorite part is making the connection directly between them and just helping them learn to talk to each other. And so, as you can tell, networks and partnerships are how the climate hubs get our jobs done. So they are essential. A quick example, you guys heard about GrassCast earlier. It's been mentioned a couple of times. GrassCast is an idea that was good, but through partnerships and stakeholders became awesome. And by awesome, I mean more useful and more usable. So in the past, I would go to, let's say, a livestock commodity organization's annual meeting, and we would have a fun little trade show booth where they could get all their climate information. So in the past, I would take the seasonal precipitation outlook with me and say, hey, here's how much rain we think you might get during the upcoming growing season. I don't know what that means for you. I'll let you figure that out, but here you go. Good luck. That wasn't fair. That wasn't acceptable. That wasn't enough. So we realized, like, wait a minute, we can do better. We need to translate the precipitation outlook into a grassland outlook. And we do that. I apologize, I didn't put more modeling. I should have put in another modeling slide about GrassCast so that you could see how it brings together field data with remote sensing data, with a process-based model, DayCent, and empirics to put all of those pieces together. So be sure to go to the GrassCast website. I'll give you the link in just a minute. You can find the papers that describe that integrated modeling process, how all those pieces of the puzzle are brought together. And you can see some science webinar recordings with Bill Parton, who is one of the fathers of GrassCast. But on partnerships, this is what the early prototype of GrassCast looked like. County level for a couple of states, a single map. We took that map out to our partners in our 6 states and asked them what they thought. And boy, did we get an earful on how we could do better. You know, it's so important to ask. We thought we were doing great. And then we asked, what do you think? And they said, oh man, you guys have a lot of work left to do. And so we got a lot of feedback from them, took it back, worked on making the product better. And now here it is in its current form. And it looks much better. It's a 3-panel map because that's what they asked for. They didn't want to trust a single prediction of how much grass would grow. They wanted what if scenarios. What if precipitation is above normal? What does GrassCast say about how much forage might grow? What if you're wrong? What if precip is only near normal? Then what does GrassCast say? And finally, worst case scenario, if the spigot turns off and it's dry all growing season, then what does GrassCast say? How much forage might grow? So GrassCast is better because of all the partnerships with just dozens of institutions and partnerships with our folks out on the ground. And the last thing I'll say about GrassCast is that it wouldn't have been possible without the long-term data sets across a wide geography of the Western US from our LTAR network. So thank goodness for that long-term research. All of that data is available through Ag Data Commons. So if you go to Ag Data Commons, which is a USDA group, and search for GrassCast, you can find all the data sets that went into this product. One last slide, because I know I'm going a little bit over time. The last thing that the climate hubs do, again, we recognize that it takes time to get out in the field and build relationships and listen to stories. And we know that you don't always have that time. And we know how hard it is to get farmers and ranchers to come out of the field to talk to you. So we work really hard in trying to bring agriculture and producer viewpoints to you in your office without taking up too much time. So as an example, our Climate Hub has developed this story map on the left, where you can go and read and see quotes from ranchers around the Western US about what resilience means to them, but also what challenges they're facing, what changes they're seeing, both ecologically and socially, how it's challenging them and how they're trying to adapt to it. So a really insightful glimpse into the perspective of Western ranchers. On the farming side, a similar project where you can go to another story map called Learning from Your Neighbor. This one is wonderful. It's a series of interviews with farmers out in their fields, explaining in their very own words, with short videos, what adaptation practices are they experimenting with? What are they struggling with? What kind of barriers did they encounter? What lessons have they learned along the way that they want to share with their fellow producers? So if you're stuck in the office, you're sad you don't get to go out and talk to farmers and ranchers, these are some ways that you can still tap into it, learn the lingo, learn to talk like a farmer or rancher, so that when you do get the opportunity, you know how to talk to them. Or just keep watching for more products from the USDA Climate Hubs, and also some great ones over with our friends at LTAR. So thank you so much, Terry.
Well, thank you, and thank you for the critical lessons, for reminding us again and again to stay grounded with the farm communities and to make sure that all of our collective efforts are tied to those really important realities. Look forward to working more in the future and building these relations to help and support each other's efforts. It's really exciting. Our next speaker is Dr. Tom Worth, who's the Division Director of the Resources and Rural Economics Division with USDA's Economic Research Service. And Tom, I'm going to keep moving along briskly to keep us on schedule. So Tom, I'm going to release my screen to you.
All right, I'm not going to put up a presentation in the interest of keeping things moving. You know, some aspects of the ERS were discussed with Spiro on the first day, and Deputy Undersecretary Mehta also touched on some aspects relevant to us. And I just want to thank Dr. Peck. Some of the stuff that she discussed, I think, will very much resonate with what I have to say. You know, at ERS, we are focused on the research side, similarly trying to provide information, data, statistics, models to inform on how best to pursue climate smart agriculture. And at ERS, especially over the last couple of years, we've been in a rebuilding mode. And so kind of reestablishing ourselves and moving forward. And so with regard to data, many of you may be familiar with our agricultural resource management survey. It's one of our primary data sets, field level data on crop production practices, site-specific characteristics on the adoption of new technologies and conservation program impacts. And we have other data sets as well, such as on ag productivity that helps us examine the climate impacts on ag productivity. Major land uses in the United States as well, going back to 1945. But where I really want to focus, and it's been mentioned before, our Regional Environmental and Agriculture Programming Model, or REAP. That is probably our most important model with regard to the topic of this conference, looking at watershed level shifts in U.S. agricultural production practices, irrigation patterns, crop prices, producer and consumer welfare, and a suite of environmental indicators, nutrient loss, soil erosion, greenhouse gas emissions. We have other models as well, but that's one I'll focus on the most. That's one that we are in the process of updating. And one thing I want to emphasize is that as we get reestablished, we're reaching out across USDA and forming those bonds and reestablishing those connections. So for example, ERS is partnering with NRCS and with ARS to generate improved estimates of manure nutrients to support the needs of all three of our agencies, but also provide information on spatial concentration of manure, nutrient production, manure nutrient excess on animal farms relative to nutrient assimilative capacity and related trends over time. And so this is going to support analysis we hope to do on water quality implications of manure nutrients and greenhouse gas emissions accounting. We are also working with NRCS with their Ag Policy Environmental Extender, or APEX, modeling group. We're collaborating to figure out a way forward on looking at crop yield growth, plant uptake of nutrients and water, edge of field losses of sediments and nutrients under climate and future climate conditions. And then we're not reaching just within USDA. And yes, this session has been a very USDA-centric session, but also reaching out to the academic community, especially with REAP, as we try to reinvigorate our REAP model. We're cooperating with, for example, Penn State University for assistance on the livestock component of the model, Virginia Tech University for applications to the Chesapeake Bay, and the University of Wisconsin National Data Consortium developing the ag data build streams and expertise options for model structure. And then also the GAMS Development Corporation for support on the coding and the general algebraic modeling system. So there's that. And then also we have, it's a combination of modeling, but also primary data gathering, a partnership with Michigan State University on cover crops and measuring how much do we need to pay farmers to plant cover crops and to continue planting cover crops into the future, and to analyze the transition for a farmer when they transfer from EQIP to CSP. And we're going to be using administrative or program data, and then also a multi-state survey of cover crop use, management practices, and willingness to accept in terms of dollars. Another thing is that we research other topics related to climate smart agriculture, such as recently completed survey of irrigation organizations, looking at how various irrigation organizations, especially in the West, are responding to drought, what their drought plans are, what kind of infrastructure improvements are they doing. And it's the first survey of its kind in decades, really. One thing I want to mention, as I said, with the rebuilding, we still are hiring. So I will shamelessly put in a plug that we do have a position being advertised as we speak for a modeler, especially for the REAP model. And if you just type in on Google ERS and USA jobs, it'll get you there. So anyway, I had to put that in there. As we look forward, one of the things we're also trying to do is take better advantage of the administrative data in places like the Risk Management Agency and Farm Service Agency to use, I think, their administrative data. There can be a lot more use than has been made of that. And then, as Dr. Peck points out, it's collaboration not just with fellow modelers in government and academia, but also making sure we're asking the right questions. So we do try to do a lot of outreach to outside groups, commodity groups, and then also outside expertise, like with the REAP model. When we get to a certain stage, we will be convening a panel of outside experts to review our work and help inform and give us a good input there. And then finally, just a thought of where are we all trying to go, headed towards, or whatever. How do we decide if we're successful or not? Well, to me, one of the most important things with all the discussions is I want to make sure that we're asking and answering the right questions. And so that's why it's been very helpful to listen to Bill and Katina, talk about the programs and what they're doing, and that helps us understand better what kind of questions we want to ask and model towards. And then the other thing is, are we building models that will engender the confidence needed to help help the conversation? If we have independent efforts and they point to a similar answer, that's fantastic. But if we have models that have different answers, but we can understand each other's models and explain the differences, that's good too. What I worry about is we have different models, different results, and no idea. So that's where I just want to express an appreciation to the AgMIP community here. I'm very excited to continue contributing and benefiting from sharing of our models and understanding. Because if we don't understand each other's models and can't explain the differences, then I think we lose confidence for the folks out there. Ultimately, we want to help inform policymakers, program administrators, so that the precious resources that are put into climate smart ag have the greatest possible impact. Thank you.
Well, Tom, thank you very much for those key closing points for the discussion, and absolutely agree. The need to make sure that we understand why we agree when we agree and why we differ when we do, and look forward to the opportunity to work together as we go forward.